welcome back to the Formly channel, where we make medical device regulations easier to understand for people like you and me. Today we're going to be talking about medical device classifications and what is a medical device. Now this isn't as straightforward as you would think it is. Let's get into it. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What is the definition of a medical device? If we're paraphrasing it from the EU medical device regulations, it's any software or instrument or apparatus that's used to do a number of things. This can include diagnosis, prevention, treatment of diseases. It can be replacing something in your anatomy or your physiology, and it can also be investigating in vitro examinations, which we'll talk about later. So when I'm thinking about what a medical device is, a lot of times I think, okay, is it replacing a doctor or is it doing doctory related things? And if it is, it's most likely a medical device. But that line between what is and what isn't a medical device can be really blurry sometimes. So let's say you have a fitness tracker, that's probably not a medical device. But if you have something that's diagnosing heart palpitations, yeah, that's probably going to be a medical device. So what are your device classifications? So there are 4 medical device classifications. There's Class 1, there's Class IIA, there's Class IIB, and there's Class 3. So essentially, as the device increases in risk it could cause to the user, it also increases in its device classification. So low-risk devices are Class 1. These are like Band-Aids and stethoscopes. And then like the highest risk class is Class 3. That's going to be your implantables, your pacemakers, and things like that. So if you have a Class 1 and a Class 3, the process for If you have a Class 1 and you have a Class 3 device, the process for certifying them is similar, but a Class 3 is going to have more requirements because you need more to essentially prove your safety and performance of the device. So you can think of it as building a paper airplane versus building an actual airplane. The process is the same, but you're going to essentially do a lot more for this actual airplane. And that makes sense because you wouldn't be running a huge clinical trial for Band-Aids. You'd want to do that for a pacemaker though. The other thing for all you US-centric people out there, the US has a different set of device classes, but they're essentially the same idea as European device classes. The only difference is that the US lumps Class 2 products together. So they have Class 1, Class 2, Class 3, whereas the EU has Class 1, Class 2A, Class 2B, Class 3. Let's talk about what type of devices make up each class. Let's play a game. So I'll describe a device and you guess which class. So the first device, this is a software app for hemophilia patients where they're going to log their information and then they'll read up on educational material to understand their condition a little bit better. So I'll give you a few seconds. What type of device would that be? That is a Class 1 device. And the reason why is it's not doing any therapeutic or diagnostic functions. Essentially, it's just helping people understand their conditions better. Let's move on to the next device. So this is an app that allows people to share information with each other when they first meet to essentially avoid any sexual transmitted diseases when one thing leads to another later. What class would this be? This is actually not a medical device. And the reason why is it's just an exchange of information. So it's not really doing any doctory related things. Sorry, it's a trick question. I had to get you with that one. On to the next one. So the next device is a machine you look into and it measures your eye movements to help diagnose Parkinson's disease. What class would this be? This is actually a Class 2A device. And the reason why is it's doing some diagnostic feature for a doctor. So it's kind of helping them do the actual Parkinson's diagnosis. So it's a little bit higher risk than the Class 1 device. Okay, so the next device is a oxygen supply machine. And this is for people who are in critical conditions. So what device class would this be? So this is actually a Class 2B device. And part of the reason is because it's supplying air to someone who's in a critical condition. So the risks are a little bit higher in this situation. All right, final device. This is an implantable heart valve. What class would this be? You probably guessed it, this is a Class 3 device. You're gonna have to implant this. There's gonna be a lot of risks involved. And if it fails, well, let's just not think about that. So you might notice that a lot of these device classes have blurred lines between them. So risk can be really spread out between Class 1, Class 2A, and Class 2A, Class 2B, and so on. And so that makes putting a single device into each class kind of difficult sometimes. And a good example of this is that recently there was a court ruling in Germany that essentially upclassified a dermatology software app. So the app was essentially a Class 1 device initially. They got sued by a competitor, and the court ruled that they were actually Class 2A. Not everybody agrees with this, but that's the law of the land. Welcome to Law and Order, MDR. So it just goes to show you that the lines between device classifications can get kind of blurry. Something that helps a lot with trying to figure out your device classification are guidance documents. So there's this group called MDCG. It's called the Medical Device Coordination Group, but they release guidances to kind of help clarify some of the regulations in the EU MDR. So these have decision trees in them where essentially you can walk through the tree and find out exactly where your device sits in its classification there. So I recommend you check it out, and I can put a link in the description below. Now let's talk about special cases for device classification. One thing I mentioned earlier was in vitro examinations, and so these devices are called in vitro diagnostics, or IVDs. So IVDs take samples from the blood or urine outside of the body, and they examine them there and analyze them there. They are slightly different than your traditional medical devices, and they're actually governed under different device regulations called the IVDR, or the in vitro diagnostic regulations. You can think of COVID tests. These are IVDs, and they essentially go through the same exact process that you would with a traditional medical device, but they just have some slightly different documents and testing you have to do for safety and performance. They also have a whole different device classification system, which is Class A, B, C, just to be different. The next thing I want to touch on are the subclasses of Class 1. These are Class 1M, Class 1S, and Class 1R. Class 1 is the only one that has subclasses, and I'll explain why. But each letter stands for some different aspect of the device that you're going to have to do more testing on. Class 1M stands for measuring. That essentially means that your device is doing some sort of accuracy measuring on some physiological process or anatomical thing, and you're claiming that it has some sort of accuracy in doing that. You're essentially going to have to do a little bit more testing to validate the fact that it can actually measure that with that amount of accuracy. Class 1R stands for reusable surgical tools. So these are just a separate class in and of themselves. They have a little bit different requirements than normal Class 1s. Class 1S is sterilization. So these are Class 1 devices that are going to come sterilized. And essentially you're going to do a little bit of extra testing just to show, hey, we can sterilize this product. It's going to reach our users completely sterilized. And there's just a little bit more documentation that comes along with proving that. The big difference with the subclasses of Class 1 are that these Class 1 M, S, and R devices have to go through a notified body. So normal Class 1 devices, you can do your self-certification and you can just put it on the market without having to submit to a notified body, but these special subclasses do. So it's like, you've been promoted, here's some more paperwork. And finally, there's a bunch of other small special cases in the regulations that just require additional testing and additional documentation. So this can include devices that elute drugs. This can include devices that have human or animal tissue in them. And it can also include devices that emit ionizing radiation. So you can tell they all have slightly different risk profiles than a normal device. And that comes along with some additional documentation. The process for certifying them is exactly the same. You just need to present a little bit more information to the regulators to get them on the market. Sorry, we are going to have to inspect your drug-eluting pig heart emitting laser. That's a device, bro. And those are your medical device classifications. Easy, right? So one thing I want you to remember is check out the MDCG guidances. We'll link them below. They have those great decision trees in them that'll help you to figure out which device class you fit into. And we also at Formly have a really awesome MDR classification tool on our website. We'll also link that below. Thanks everybody for watching. If this video helped at all, please hit that subscribe button. Please hit that subscribe button below. Thanks.